Hi, this is Dr. Cesar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. You know, when I created the podcast, I started the podcast, I never anticipated the reach. I think I expected I would reach out to my network and get their stories and share those stories because I thought it was important that we share those stories. But that network has since grown exponentially, and I'm incredibly blessed and excited because I feel like every interview now is someone new to the network, but somebody whose story again is inspiring and is important to tell. And today I'm excited about this opportunity. I'm excited about having my guest on today. And as always, I'm going to allow my guests to introduce themselves because I think they do a much better job of that. So, Vanessa, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners out there?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Jose, for having me on the program. My name is Vanessa Fonseca Chavez, and I am currently an Associate Dean of Inclusion and Student Success at ASU. And as of this week, also a Assistant Vice Provost of the Polytechnic campus.
Vanessa, congratulations
Thank you.
on the new title, the new role. Before we jumped on, we talked a little bit about sort of the expectations of what that means, and so I'm eager to get into your story to learn more about your journey, but also about the work that you're doing now and will be doing, expect to be doing. Vanessa, I ask all of my guests, if you had to identify a starting point for your educational journey, where would that starting point be for you?
Oh, I was in listening to the other podcast episodes, I was really inspired by all of the different stories that people had. And so I was anticipating the question, of course. And I think that there have been a number of moments over the course of my education where things have happened and I didn't realize the value of those things at that moment. And so I'd like to share maybe just a couple of those with you without saying that there was an exact moment, but sort of pick moments over time that make sense. And
Absolutely.
the very first one was we were in elementary school living in northern New Mexico in a town called El Rancho. And there's 5 of us as siblings, and, I was right in the middle, but I had a twin sister and then a younger brother, older sister, another older sister, and my oldest sister was in high school, and when we were, riding the bus to school, the bus would pick up the high schoolers first, and they would drop them off, and then the same bus driver, same bus, would come around and pick up the elementary school kids and take them to school. For some reason, for about a period of a week, we got on the bus with the high schoolers. My mom had talked to the bus driver and said, "Hey, we're gonna be busy." I still don't know today what they were doing, but my parents were doing something. So they talked to the bus driver. His name was John Walsh, which now sounds really funny because he wasn't on America's Most Wanted. He was just the nice guy who was a bus driver. And when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be a bus driver because Walsh was just such a cool bus driver. And so all of us got picked up at the same time. And again, don't know what my parents were doing, but my sister got dropped off. And then there was a little bit of time in between picking up the elementary school kids. So John Walsh would take us to the convenience store just off the side of the road, and he would get us those little Huggies drinks every day, money out of his pocket, so that we could have a nice little snack in the morning as we were waiting to pick up the other kids. The funny part is, of course, when you're in elementary school, sitting in the back of the bus is cool, and so everybody wanted to do that. And I clearly remember the amount of hatred we received because we were in the back of the bus at the beginning of the day, and all the other kids came on, and they were mostly, Latinx kids, but they got on the bus and they were like, "Why do they get to sit in the back of the bus? I'm the first one that you pick up." And so that really stood out in my mind for a couple of reasons. One, because how awesome was it for my parents to organize us getting to school, right? Because again, still don't know what they were doing. I might go ask them when I see them next, but still don't know what they were doing. But I thought it was really great that as a community, the bus driver said, "I will take care of your kids for the hour that I have or whatever amount of time it was before I pick them up." And so I thought that was really great. The second one that I thought of was when I was in eighth grade, and I was always a good student. There were multiple times where things were happening around me that I didn't have the social consciousness for. But I got a C in, I don't even know what class it was. There was like English, and then there was like some other class related to humanities. And Miss Carruthers gave me a C in her class. And I know now when we teach our students, we say, I didn't give you anything. This is the grade you deserved. But at that moment, I had always done well in school. And I got home, and because I have a twin sister who did not get a C in the class, she got an A. My parents said, how come you didn't get an A like your sister did? That set up an entire trajectory of my twin and I being in super competitive mode for everything we've done forever and ever in life.
Wow.
And I don't know why I got a C. I don't know if I didn't turn in assignments. I don't remember. All I remember is going home and my parents saying, why didn't you do what your sister did in that class? And so there were a couple of other moments in elementary and middle school where, again, I didn't have the social consciousness to understand what was happening. I was in sixth grade and we had just moved from northern New Mexico to Grants, New Mexico, which is kind of in the northwestern part of the state near the Arizona border. That's where all of my family is from. And we were in a reading group in an elementary school. I don't know if you remember, they put the like high level readers in one group and then the other and so you like, I don't remember what the names of them were, but we were in the high level reading group. But there was this disassociation that happened because our principal, Miss Miller at the time, did not care for us for whatever reason. Again, I didn't know why in sixth grade, but she continuously told us as we were sitting in the high level reading group that we would never amount to anything. And it was so weird to hear because I didn't understand why she would think that way. Of
Wow.
course, now I have all kinds of reasons why, as someone who studies, Chicano studies, as someone who has, experienced life differently and kind of been able to put things together. I understand it differently, of course, but for many years, from probably sixth grade to eighth grade, we heard that a lot. Not from our Latinx community, but from another community. And so it really influenced, and those serve as sort of core memories for me to think about what kind of job are we doing as we're encouraging our youth to become educated. And I would never, ever in my life imagine telling a student, someone who is high achieving, someone who is not high achieving, whoever they might be, that they're not going to amount to anything. And those little like words just kept following me everywhere. And so I am a hard worker, as I imagine many of us are. The number one thing that you can use to sort of weaponize against me is to tell me that I'm not a hard worker. And I think that's true for a lot of us that come from working class backgrounds, people who really take pride in the work that they do, and people who, know how to work in lots of different capacities, right? So I tell people, I'm like, I dare you to tell me that you don't think I'm a hard worker so that I can show you and I can prove you wrong. And the lesson is not necessarily to prove somebody wrong, but it's just I take very big personal offenses to people insulting my work ethic.
Absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so,
So,
and I think for that, so I have all those kind of moments coupled together, but then there were these other moments where people were trying to point at my potential and I wasn't getting it. And so the one moment I'll share for that is when I was a freshman in college and I was taking my English 101 class. And Miss June Chapman was my TA for that class. Lovely human being. Don't know where she is now. But one day, I was turning in my essays and she says, I had my meeting with her and she said, you got the best grade and this is the best essay out of all my students in all of my classes. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. I didn't think much of it, right? And then she did the thing that you don't want your professor to do, which is like, Vanessa's going to read her paper in front of the whole class so that you all know what a good paper sounds like. And never occurred to me in that moment that she was saying, hey, you're really good at this. You're really good at writing. You're really good at interpreting texts. Never in my life imagined that that would turn into my current career as an English professor. And had I listened to that a little bit more, I think it would have been I could have been cultivated differently, but, I went off. I was trying to be a pre-farm major. I was trying to be a business management major. I was trying to be a human resource manager. But of course, it all came back around to me being an English professor, which is what I am now.
Wow. Oh man, I love all of the stories, and so many questions now. I want to go back to, you remember this principal telling you, what did you do with, did you do anything with that information? Did you go home? Did you tell your parents? What did you do with it? Or did you just kind of, well, that's an odd thing to say.
Yeah, it was, again, like I said, sort of disassociating because we had another professor whose name was Mr. Eversole, was incredible, so encouraging. So, I have projects in my garage boxes now that I did in his class because I was so proud of the kind of environment that he cultivated for his students, really an environment of creativity, an environment where, we were writing ads for local newspapers, doing, all kinds of fun stuff. We were doing like CAD classes at that time, like drafting in 6th grade, all that kind of fun stuff. But Miss Miller I was still in school in 6th grade when they paddled students. And so that feels like something that you talk about within the context of the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? But we were over there in
Yeah.
the 90s getting paddled in these like rural communities. And I think, and again, reflecting back on it and really trying to put it in the context of social constructs. Um, I can't help but believe it was because we were Hispanic students in a majority white community.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't know this when I was growing up, but a lot of the research that I work on now is in rural Arizona, and it's focused on ethno-religious conflict. And so the conflicts that had arisen in white LDS communities and Hispanic Catholic communities who settled simultaneously, right? And that was my story when I was growing up, although I didn't know that. And so now I'm doing it as research, and I'm like, it all makes sense now, right? And my mom, I got in lots of fights in middle school, some fights in high school. I'm not a fighting kind of person. I'm not trying to fight anybody. I'm a patient, loving person. So but I remember my mom, Miss Miller was similar to Miss James or Miss Jameson in middle school. I got in a fight, and my mom went to the high school or to the middle school principal, and she said, "Why are all these white girls always picking on my girls?" Because my mom was like,
Uh-huh.
"What is happening?" So she was just like, "What is happening here?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so she knew it, right? But we didn't get that I didn't get that context until much later, but I was like, "I don't understand why everybody hates us."
Wow.
And,
The uh-huh. Go ahead.
I think especially coming from northern New Mexico, because northern New Mexico is very, very Chicano, very manito, very Chicano. And then when you come to an area that's less so, I think it was startling for us because so much of what we learned in northern New Mexico was a sense of, cultural pride and heritage. We had teachers with guitars singing La Bamba in class, and we're writing all these like Así es Nuevo Mexico kind of like little packets. I still have those from 4th grade. And then you come to this area of the state where your Spanish isn't valued, your heritage isn't uplifted, any of these things. And it is, again, really disassociating to have that kind of experience. I think my mom knew it right away. We didn't realize until much later.
So you're having these experiences, your mother's fully aware of, what's going on and understanding sort of the context and everything. The messaging at home. It sounds like school was still very important, right? From the time from the having that conversation, your parents organizing and having the bus driver pick you all up to questioning why aren't you getting the same grades as your sister? Do you remember some of like the explicit expectations that your parents had of you in terms of school?
There were never any explicit expectations. I think it was widely understood in our household that you were going to do well. And we never really talked about it. My parents didn't say, an education's important, you should be in school, but I think we just knew. We knew, and I think because from an early age, like I said, we did well in school. That was the baseline expectation. If anything moved from that expectation, like the C in Miss Carruthers class, we would hear about it, right? But otherwise, it was just pretty, like You're going to graduate. They didn't say, do you want to go to college? Where do you want to go to college? What do you want to do? It was just assumed that that's what was going to be the next step. And I don't know if I felt it more so as like me and my twin sister, or if my siblings also felt that same expectation. But I think, my twin sister graduated as salutatorian. It was expected that she was going to go on, right? I was also in our top 10 class. And so we only had one experience when we were younger. My oldest sister did a summer program at New Mexico Highlands University, which is in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And we went and picked her up, and we were like, hey, I want to go to school here. Not because we knew about the school, not because, but it's because I saw my older sister there and I
Yeah.
wanted to do what she was doing.
Wow.
We eventually went to the University of New Mexico, and I had kind of a perspective change on this in recent years because my former dean here at ASU shared something with me that I hadn't thought of before. But I had always told the story that instead of talking to all the students about where they might want to go and kind of cultivating, different college experiences, I said they corralled all of us into the cafeteria in high school, and we all filled out applications to go to the University of New Mexico. I saw that for a long time as a negative, and that the counselors hadn't taken time to individualize our experiences. And my former dean, shout out to Dwayne Rowan, he said, how great that everyone had an opportunity to apply to college. And I never thought about it from that perspective. And so I appreciate him saying that, because I didn't realize that if they hadn't done that that day, who knows where any of us would have been.
Yeah.
And so I
Wow.
appreciate that. But yeah, so went to the University of New Mexico. My son had applied there just a few years ago, and it's funny because I think sometimes when you're in close proximity to a college town, you just assume that everyone's going to go there, right? I think we also assume at ASU that we're going to get a fair amount of students from Arizona, right? And that's just sort of we can bank on that, and then our extra efforts are bringing in the California students, because the California system's overburdened and so we're happy to serve them. But going close to home was it meant a lot to me. But again, it was something that my parents weren't going to be able to pay for. We understood that we were going to have to figure out on our own, and we did. And there was one moment when I was at UNM and my dad came to visit, and we were at a Denny's, and I started crying because he was buying my brother a four-wheeler, and I was like, I can't even afford my chemistry book. And he was like, Ness, do you want $100 for your chemistry book? I was like, I would love $100 for my chemistry book. So he gives me $100 at dinner, and that's how much they contributed to my college education financially. Of course, they
Yeah.
super supportive, all of that good stuff. They were so proud of us. But that $100 was very meaningful in that moment.
Wow. You attend the University of New Mexico. What is it that you wanted to do? What were your aspirations at that point?
When I was in high school, there was a woman, don't know who she is, don't remember her name. She came to our high school class and she said, pharmacy is a great career for women who want careers and who want to have a family. And I said, sold. That's all I needed to hear from that person. I wanted to do both of those things. And so I chose to be a pre-pharm major. And I don't know what compelled me to do that. I wouldn't say that I did really well in math in high school, but it just wasn't something that I was passionate about. And I would say to people too, there, of course, for a lot of Latinx communities, there's the practical thing, right? What will support the family, and there's kind of the passion road, right? And I think at that point, I assumed I could be a pre-pharm major because I was pretty good at school anyway. But like most of us in that first and second semester, we just get slapped in the face. And we realize that being a college student is so different than being a high school student. There's so much more that you have to do, so much more preparation, so much more personal responsibility. Don't sign up for an 8 o'clock class if you're not a morning person. And so I was taking these classes, and one semester I was in chemistry and calculus at the same time. I had to drop one to try to pass the other. I didn't pass the other one, so I had to take them both over again. And I just I didn't like it. I didn't like having to try multiple times. And the second time, I took both of the classes, I passed them with a C, and I just remember walking out of my chemistry final feeling, pretty good about my efforts, and I tried as hard as I could, and I got a 75, and I was like, "Hell yes. I did my best, and this is what it was. I need a different pathway." So, I was taking simultaneously some Spanish classes. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, and
Mhm.
so, it was really important to me to learn Spanish, because, my mom and my grandma would always be talking about us. I felt like it was such a important part, especially in northern New Mexico, of who you are and the way that you understand your culture. I would never say to people, I'm not one of those Chicanas that's like, "You have to know Spanish to be a Chicana." But I do think that it offers a glimpse into aspects of our culture that are for me anyway, are very personally enriching. And so, I took 4 years in high school, had a really great high school teacher, Henry Lopez. Shout out to him wherever he is. But he was so inspiring, and he was the one that really cultivated my love of learning Spanish. And so, I took 4 years there, went to UNM, took Spanish classes, and when at the point that I realized I wasn't gonna be a in pharmaceutical anything, right, a pharmacist, I said, "I'm gonna follow my love for language," and my love for language attached to my desire to understand, the loss of language in my family, and what were the factors that contributed to that. Why is every Hispanic surname person in New Mexico, differently abled in Spanish language? Because we could all understand what was being spoken to us, but like we didn't know how to respond. Of course, I learned later, linguistically what that meant, being a reciprocal bilingual. But I really leaned into learning Spanish, taking classes that had to do more with like regional, like Nuevo Mexicano culture, Southwest. Read so many great books. Also, learning about Latin American culture and, main, big literary movements. And that was all really exciting. But nothing was more exciting than learning about Chicano culture for me and what that meant for my own kind of personal discovery, my own trajectory, the understanding of my own family history and background. And so I pursued then a Spanish major and a business management minor. And so, graduated with those, and then, I wanted to then be still sort of rejecting this idea that I would be a writer, professor, whatever, and I applied to do my, master's degree in human resource management because I wanted to be a human resource manager. For whatever reason, I love the idea of hiring people and firing people and everything in between. God knows what compelled me to, like, even have that thought. So
Says, you know, says says the person who says they don't like fighting.
no,
And
help
so
people with their issues.
yeah, so before, I want to backtrack a little bit. We because I've had this conversation with another guest, and this was we were talking about. I did Chicano studies as an undergrad. I'm from South Texas, but I for me, I didn't know any of my history. And I always tell people I had to go 2,000 miles away to learn about where I was from. How far is New Mexico, University of New Mexico? How far was that from your hometown?
Hour and 15 minutes. Not far at all.
And so here you are, you travel nearby. What was it? I mean, you talked about, I would say, can you get into more of what was it that appealed to you about about the subject matter?
Yeah, I think for me was putting pieces together and figuring out that, the reason I don't speak Spanish is not because my mom didn't teach it to me or my dad didn't teach it to me, right? They had their own kind of complicated history with language. My father spoke it with his grandfather until his grandfather passed away. So everybody has their different linkages and histories to the language. But for me, it was interesting to not only recuperate the language, but understand how hard it is to use it. And New Mexico has a distinct dialect of Spanish. And it was interesting to learn an academic Spanish, but then be told by people that I don't speak Spanish like a Nuevo Mexicana. And that was, again, disassociations all over the place. And so, I think for me, there were a lot of really great programs. We have, UNM has a Spanish as a heritage language program that was founded by Sabino Ulibarri, who is from Tierra Maria, where the like infamous courthouse raids took place. So again, just kind of like pointing out all of these things. And that heritage language program was really important. And I think it really, I wouldn't go so far as to say it saved my life, but it definitely gave me a purpose. And that program is really more focused on the language that you bring to the table. You're not a second language learner. You come from Spanish speaking communities in various ways. And you have an opportunity to not only learn about yourself and your cultural background, but to learn that there is Spanish for different contexts, right? So almost everyone in that class comes and they're like, I speak Spanish, I speak mucho, I speak like a pocha, and people seem to feel really down about the kind of Spanish that they're speaking, right? And what I really loved in that program was that you don't speak bad Spanish, you just speak Spanish. And
Yeah.
like, si se entienden, like in the room together, it doesn't matter, right? Now, obviously, if I'm going to go out somewhere else and speak to a different community, I'm going to learn the register appropriate to that community, just like we do in English, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go talk to the provost in the same way that I'm going to talk to Jose Navarro, right? Like we just don't speak. There's different registers that we're going to employ and bring in when we're having these conversations. And so, was really helpful for me to understand that, and then to also learn from different folks. There was another person in the program, Pedro Torres, who was from Texas, and gosh, I learned so much about Texas in that program as well. And fun fact, no Mexicanos have a deep dislike for Tejanos because y'all tried to annex us back in the day, and it was not successful. But I think we also like
Wow.
Nuevo Mexicano pride is probably only second to Texas in pride for one's home state. And so it's really just kind of fun to be in that environment to kind of look at, how similarly we came to be, right? But then how
Yeah.
distinct we are even between Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, for example, right? Like wildly different histories, wildly different formations of identity and culture. But all of that for me was the most fun part, is how do I start connecting all these different things that I'm seeing and noticing, and um I would all of course be remiss to mention that I got pregnant in my second year of undergrad, and so that really threw threw additional layers into the way that I navigated college. But because then it was like, who am I for my son? Not just who am
Mhm.
I as a person, a 19-year-old trying to navigate the world, but who am I and who am I going to be for him? And that was important too.
Wow. I was going to ask, um, because you talked about getting to college, pursuing pre-farm, and sort of the struggles with, the math and science classes, right? And then, but then studying the language, studying the Chicano history, and as you just said, right? Maybe it gave you a little bit of purpose. I was going to ask, is that because you told us a little bit about the limited amount of support, financial support that your parents were able to give you, right? And so, I work with first year students. I help them transition to college, and help them navigate sort of some of, the troubled waters sometimes. And so I think for a lot of students, they struggle to find that purpose, that thing that's going to, encourage them, keep them going. And so it sounds like, I was going to ask if that was it, but it also sounds like you said, who am I for my son? Who am I going to be for my son? And so much going on there, so much complexity. Thank you for sharing all of this. My next question, though, is, here you are, you've found something that you love to study, learning so much about yourself, but also identity development, all of these things. And I'm going to go study human resource management. Why? When I told my father I was majoring in Chicano studies, the first question he asked me, can you get a job with that? And I didn't know any better. I said, yes, absolutely, Dad. Yes. I didn't want him to worry. Was that what you were worried about?
I honestly don't know. At no point in my life did I ask myself the question, "Can I support myself?"
Right.
And and I think it's such a practical question, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things that now I'm reflecting on, and my my husband tells me, he's like, "You knew when you chose humanities that your salary was going to be less than all those people around you." And I was like, "I didn't know. I didn't know doing things that I like to do would lead to like lower financial achievement in life, simply because the humanities are undervalued, undermined, all of those things, right? And of course, we are big proponents for the humanities, but no, I never thought about these things. And I don't at least I don't have a core memory where I told myself like, can you support yourself? I did I think we're part of a generation where it made sense to hustle for everything, right? And I think we're millennials probably more than any other generation are so deeply ingrained in hustle culture. Like anything and everything you can do to move forward, keep moving fast, don't think about things. And so that when I did get pregnant, I was already working. I was working. I had 2, 3, sometimes 4 jobs at a time. Again, I don't know how I survived my early 20s with like a child, a marriage, a divorce, a lot jobs, master's degree, all of this stuff. But what really helped for me is that my siblings and I were so close. And we all lived in Albuquerque at the same time. And we all rented houses together. Like I wasn't out there like trying to do this on my own, right? I lived with siblings. I first moved in with my aunt when I moved to college. I paid her $100 a month to live in her house. Having a supportive community means so much when you just don't know what you're doing with your life, right? And I've never been in a situation where I've lived by myself except for 1 year at ASU when I came as a doc student, and it was the worst. I was so depressed. I was so sad. It was so different from the community like embrace that I had felt for so many years. And that I think, and because you pull all your money together and you make the bills work, but there's always these like dramas because people bring their boyfriends to live in the house and their girlfriends and whatever, or friends who need a helping hand. But it was like that, like we figured out a way to make it all happen, and everybody had their jobs, and people were contributing, and that was really helpful. And my family is just the best. They're
Yeah.
the best because whenever you need them, they're there, and you could always go to my even if my parents weren't like handing out money, you could always go to them and be like, "Hey, like I'm having a really hard time with this," and we would all figure out a way to make it work. UNM for years and years and years has had the lottery scholarship, and I was able to go to UNM on the lottery scholarship, and that meant that all of my tuition was paid for the length of time that I was going to college. So
Wow.
all the way through my doctorate, I told people I have no idea how much college costs. I saw the bills at some point, right?
Yeah.
Um, but they were covered because New Mexico just has a really great model for investing, in college if that's a pathway that you want to pursue. So I was really happy to be able to go to college, essentially for free. Of course, not everything is free because you're paying your books and you're paying your lodging and you're paying, all your food and all of that good stuff. Um, and there was one semester where I lost the lottery scholarship, and that was really sad. And that's another core memory because when I failed my calculus exam and I failed my chemistry class, I took them again, and because you take them again, they don't count as new credits, and I didn't know that. So
Mm.
I lost my lottery scholarship that semester. It was a very expensive semester for me. But then I took, I think, 18, somewhere between 18 and 21 credit hours to get it back again. And so
Oh, wow.
it's all these different kind of movidas that you're trying to employ because again, you don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I took those same classes again, they wouldn't count, toward my 12 credit hours. But things that you just kind of learn along the way, and just super grateful to my family for being so supportive, everyone just, they're just wonderful. Can't say, more about how great they were and how much we have supported each other over the years.
At any point, was there any point where you thought, I can't do this?
Yep, yep. I had a I had just had my son, and, I we had brought him home, and it was a Saturday. We got some pizza, had some food, whatever. Lots of people came over that weekend, and then when they sent me home from the hospital, they said, "Call us on Monday morning, you're gonna have some appointments." And so I called, and they said, "You have an appointment in 30 minutes." So I'm frantic. I got this new baby at home. I'm 20 years old. I should like grab all my things. And I go down, we lived in some really janky apartments, but that's what we could afford at the time. And so went downstairs, told my, boyfriend at the time I'd see him later, and then realized that when we brought Kendall home, I left my wallet in the car. I left all my things. All that shit got stolen. And I didn't have any of my things. The window was broken. My wallet was gone. I had to be at the hospital. There's a lot of things I didn't know about being a new mom. Things leak. And so all this was happening simultaneously. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just have to get to the hospital, And so I rush over. I don't have any of my documents to show anybody about like who I am and why I'm there. And, I told, again, my boyfriend at the time, I was like, "Please call your mom, send help. I don't know what it's gonna look like, but please send help." And, she at some point, came and picked up my son, and then I just went to my sister's house that afternoon, and I was like, "Yo, I can't do this." I was like, "I can't be a mom. I can't, like, take on this and I just remember laying in the bed and just crying for I don't even know how long, but it was in that moment, it seemed utterly impossible to take on everything that I was taking on. And, obviously, I pulled myself together, but in that moment, I was just like, "It's not gonna happen." And obviously, it had to, right?
Yeah.
The live being in the world that needed to be cared for. So, but it was a really, it was an interesting moment because I was like, "Ooh." But most of the time, I feel like I can handle most anything people throw at me, and it almost feels like a challenge, but,
Wow.
not that day.
No. Um, so then, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Let's walk forward then to the human resource management. So what was that experience like?
So I finished my undergrad with a business management minor. And so in that summer, I had two Spanish classes that I need to complete before I moved on to my dream of being randomly a human resource manager. And so I went to the Anderson Schools of Business and, I said I wanted to apply for the master's program. And they looked over my coursework and the application and all of that good stuff. And they said, you're missing a class to apply. And it was American Studies. And the very first class I took in Chicano anything at UNM was an upper division American Studies class, and it was Chicano film with Gabriel Melendez. And it turns out that I took an upper division American Studies class when I should have taken a lower division, and they wouldn't count it for credit for admission into the master's program. So again, how was I don't know. No, I don't remember talking to anybody about what I needed and what I missed and those sort of things. And so I was in a summer class, and so that right at that moment, my dreams of being a human resource manager died. And I said, "Well, I've got to do something," because they told me, "Well, you can spend the fall semester and you can take this class and you can reapply." And I was like, "That's 8 months of me doing nothing," and that was not acceptable. And so I was taking these classes in Spanish. I had two more to finish up my degree because they let me walk in the spring, but I had these two classes. And my professor, Kimberly Lopez, at the time was also the interim chair for the Spanish department. And, she asked me, she's like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, when is the deadline to apply for the master's in Spanish?" Because I was like, I got to do something. I can't just like not keep going to school. And obviously, with my Spanish degree, I wasn't like getting a job. So, because what was I going to do with that? I didn't have
Yeah.
the potentials to be a teacher. I didn't even know what the job market might look like. So I think I was set on just staying in school. And so I said, "When is the deadline to apply for the master's in Spanish?" And she said, "It's tomorrow." And and so then like the little seedlings for another dream dying were emerging. And she said, "But don't worry." She said, you're a really great student. We really want you to succeed. We want you in this program. And that was very different from the business school's approach, which is just like, you're one in 1,000 people who are trying to do this. Go away, get your stuff, come back later. Whereas Spanish, because I got my undergrad there and because they were, they knew who I was, they believed in my potential to continue. And so that day, she said, you're going to apply for the program. You're going to take your GRE, obviously not today, but you're going to sign up for it. And she said, then I need you to record a language tape and submit it so that we can consider you for teaching. That was the first time ever in my life I ever thought about being a teacher, was that moment where she said, and do this so you can be a teacher. And I said, "Great, sounds great." And so I remember going home and I was like, "Shit, I gotta record a whole thing in Spanish." I was like, "This is really hard." And, I hadn't in language acquisition, speaking is almost the last ability that you'll obtain, right? You'll learn to read, write, and listen and comprehend before you ever speak. But that day I had to, a fuerzas, I had to like go and record this like language tape. And I just remember I was at my sister's house and I was sitting on the front porch and I would start the tape recorder and then I would be like, shit, I messed up. Started over again. Hours went by, or it seemed like hours went by, and I just start, stop, start, stop. And I was like, I'm not gonna get through this. And then I finally told myself, I said, let's get in the car and go home. Put the tape recorder on, and so I turned it on, drove home. It probably took me about 20 minutes. And then I got there and I turned it off and I was done. So I sent in what it was. And then I got an offer to do my master's and to be a teaching assistant. And that was, yeah, it
How
was
long
great.
was that? How long was that program?
2 years, 2 years. And they're multiple tracks. I mentioned before that I was a heritage language student as an undergrad, and they did have opportunities to be in the heritage program as a teaching assistant. Because I came into the program so late, I was assigned to be in the second language program, to teach for the second language program. So like Spanish 101, Spanish 102, but I only had a contract for 1 semester. And my understanding, again, trying to make sense of the world and opportunities around me, was that I had to find my own opportunity for the second semester. Dr. Maria Dolores Gonzalez was overseeing the Heritage Language program at the time, and she said, I would love to have you teach for our program. Can we bring you on in the spring? And I said, that sounds great. I don't have a job for the spring. And little did I know that there was drama. There was drama between second language and heritage. I walked into a lot of messes. And when I negotiated my own way, my own job for the spring, it made the other folks upset because they wanted me to teach over there. But no one had given me any contract. And I thought I was on my own to figure it out. But the short of it is I started teaching in heritage language, and it was a really great opportunity, not just from the perspective of being a former student, but to also kind of just take everything that I learned and embraced in that program and use it as a TA.
Let me ask you, because I think throughout your story, you've talked about these moments where, well, nobody told me that, right? I'm sure you've had this experience with students that you've worked with where, yeah, they didn't know any better. Nobody's explained this to them, right? We call it the hidden curriculum, right? All of these things, these expectations that, for a lot of us, for many of us, we just don't know because we've never done it before, and maybe the folks around us have never done it before. What advice would you give a student, particularly a graduate student, who's in the middle of their program and finds themselves kind of lost, trying to make sense of everything, and is dealing with, well, nobody's being direct with me. Nobody's right. What advice do you give a student like that?
Ask questions all the time. And I think it's okay to come in and say, I don't know this. Does someone have an answer for me? One of my colleagues, one of my favorite phrases is that she says, help me understand. And sometimes she says it sarcastically because, she's doing it in jest. And sometimes she really is, I don't know what that means. I think it's perfectly fine for us to come into a room and not act like we know what's happening. I would say 60% of the time I know what's happening in the room around me. The other part, like, I'm like, is everybody else as confused as me? Does anybody else have the same questions as me? And probably they do. And so, I always tell students, I'm like, ask the questions. If you don't know what that means, ask. If you don't understand what the consequences of this are, like, please let me help you with that, And I think in my role now, I try to be as transparent as an administrator can be when I'm talking to students, to faculty, to staff, because most of us don't know, and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to not know these things, because the alternate scenario is that we're running through this world with like things that people think that we know, and we don't know those things. And then they make assumptions about the kind of work we can do and the kind of people we are when, we could have started from a different place had we been more transparent about like where we're at. Right. So
Yeah.
I always try, one of the things I really like to do for grad students is help them on the job market. And a lot of that is just understanding the environment of interviews, knowing how to read a job ad. So many people don't know that all of this is very like, it's very structured. You apply for a job, you have to meet at ASU required and desired qualifications. And if you don't meet those things, like you don't move through, right? So when you're filling out a job application, are you speaking to the required and desired, or are you simply, and I think that for grad students, life is hard enough anyway. They're applying for, tens, 20, hundreds of jobs in some cases. So it's hard to have those job materials reflect each individual job opportunity, but to the extent that you can, it makes such a huge difference, right? And
Mm.
and we don't get a chance to work with a lot of grad students here, in my program anyway, but in addition to sort of letting them know, like, hey, here's all the things you may not know about, I also just want to be a good human being and supporter of them, checking in with them, making sure that they're like feeling okay. My good colleague at New Mexico State, Judith Flores Carmona, has a really great, she tells people, ¿Cómo está tu corazón? And I think it's such a great question, right? Because that's just like wrapped up in so many different things. So are we checking in with our students? Are we making sure that they're okay? I think some times in this nation are more tumultuous than others. And so people need to be checked on. People don't always have the same, I was very fortunate and continue to be very fortunate to have such a great community, and I think a lot of it is because, like, if I've ever needed to know something, I feel like I have cultivated good relationships where I can, like, just cold call people and be like, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Or, "Hey, can you support me with this?" And because the relationships are good, like, when you have a good relationship with people, they're like, "If Jose asks me something, I don't even care what it is because Jose asked, and Jose's cool, and I'm here to support him." Right? That's the kind of world I want us to have, right? Where, like, the relationships are just so good that you can be like, "Can you help me with anything?" And people are like, "I'll be there." You know? When your
I
friend's
love that.
stranded, in your city overnight and they need you to come pick them up and take them to eat, do it, because they're cool people. But I want students to know, graduate students, undergraduates, whatever, that, and I think that your podcast really brings to light a lot of these things. What is the journey that we're all taking to get here, and to really demystify the idea that all professors have had like a very streamlined pathway to education, or elitist kind of pathway to education, which is the farthest from the truth, right? We're
Yeah.
all just trying to figure things out. And some of our pathways are more rough than others, right? And so but
Oh
students
yeah.
knowing this, I think, is really important. The other day we sat with some students, and it was two freshmen, one from Texas, one from Arizona, and they just felt lonely. And they said, I got here and ASU is such a big place, and it took one person to say, hey, I think you should come to this meeting. And she said, now when I'm meeting these other people, and now we're meeting, professors, and but it just takes one person to reach out and say, hey, like, let's go create a community together.
I love that.
Like a weird cultish way, obviously.
No, 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 of course not. No, no, I get it. And
Yes.
I appreciate that. I think those are some valuable words, and I love, right. I think at the heart, you break it down essentially just asking questions, and just kind of putting yourself out there. So thank you for that. Here you are, you finished the program, and what came next for you?
Hard stuff. Bunch of hard shit. So,
What you mean it didn't get any
I
easier after that?
Yeah, yeah. So, my son was 5 when I finished my master's, and I stayed at UNM for 1 year just as a faculty associate because I wasn't, again, there I am again. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I should probably, a lot of my professors said, you have to go get a doctorate now, and I don't know if I did or I didn't need to do that, but it seemed that I tend to be a person who wants to go to the next height of the mountain. So I was like, let's go. And so I applied to a few places. I applied to UNM, I applied to ASU, and then I applied to University of Illinois Chicago. One of my mentors suggested that I apply there because she really wanted me to be a sociolinguist, and I don't know if that's what I wanted for me, but I appreciated her and I really respected her as a mentor. So I said, sure, I'll apply to this program in Chicago, and I didn't get in, and it wasn't surprising, and that's okay. And I got into ASU, and I remember getting the letter in my mailbox at UNM and just being so excited that somebody accepted me into a program, not ever having met me, just by the things that I sent in the mail. And I don't know if I've ever shared this before, but the essay that I sent to get into ASU was the final paper that I wrote for my master's degree for Dr. Tadiana Rebolledo. And when she returned it to me, she said, "No es el mejor trabajo que has hecho. Creo que simplemente estabas cansada." And so, in English, it's, "I don't think this is the best work that you've done. You just seem pretty tired." And so, but I didn't have anything better than that, right? Like, I was like really over here being a mom, working 4 jobs, like trying to get through this master's degree, and then also trying to aspire into a PhD program. And so I tell people all the time, like, those are the worst 2 years as a student that I had experienced because I couldn't try harder than I was trying. And, I think sometimes you're in a scenario where, if you would have just done this, it would have turned into this, blah, blah, blah. That was all I could give in those 2 years in that master's program. And so I think for somebody saying, congratulations, you're going to come in, we've admitted you as a PhD student meant so much to me because there's some pretty bad years as a student, you know? And so it was a really hard decision to come to ASU. I was 25. It was the first time I was leaving home. Um, my siblings and I at that time were all living together. My parents had bought a house in Albuquerque because they didn't want they didn't want to drive to our houses separately. So they said, "We're going to buy a house. Y'all are going to live in it, and you're going to pay our mortgage." And we said, "That sounds great." And it was like a 2 bedroom, 1.5 bath. We didn't fit. We had to make new bedrooms. It was fine. And that's still the house that they're in now, and it's great. But I had to make a decision to leave New Mexico for the first time, and then to also leave my son, which was really hard. And a lot of that is framed in academia as like, you can't come back unless you like go away and come back. And so
Yeah.
did have it in my head that there was no way I could get a PhD at ASU or at UNM rather, and then get a job at UNM, right? Or in Albuquerque. And so those are really hard decisions. I think I'm finally at a point in my life where I can talk about it without like losing my shit, right? But it was hard. It was really hard because I was 25 and I was here by myself in Phoenix, Arizona, and my dad, bless his little heart, he said, when I told him I was leaving, he said, "Well, who's going to take care of my yard if you leave?" And I said, "Well, I hadn't thought about that, but I don't know." And my parents they were upset also because my twin sister was also relocating to Flagstaff, Arizona for a job. And so, they had invested all of this in a house for us, and then we left. And so for them, I hadn't thought about it from their perspective, but they're a little sad too, about all the children abandoning ship. And so I came to ASU, and my mom told me, she was like, you just have to, she goes, she's very like spiritual, right? She's like, "It's okay, everything's gonna be okay." She goes, "You go do you." And my mom was always the kind of person where, I wouldn't say that she experienced a lot of autonomy as a wife. She was an excellent mother. But she always inspired all of us to just do what we wanted to do. And she was like, "Don't you let anybody take care of you until you can take care of yourself." And that really stuck with me too. So So I come to ASU totally sad and lonely and dealing with, what does it mean to live away from my son? Every other weekend at 5 o'clock when I was done teaching, I'd get in my car and I'd drive to Albuquerque and we'd spend the weekend together. And every Sunday afternoon, we'd both cry our eyes out because I had to come back. Right. And there were a couple of things I think in hindsight that I appreciated about it. One is that when we were together, we were just together. I wasn't trying to do work. I wasn't trying to like do anything else other than spend time with my kid. And when I was here at ASU, I was just doing my work, and so for the first time in 5 years, I was just a student. My son would come and stay with us for the summer. I had to talk to my roommates about that. It was okay. Or I told my roommates, I'm like, this is happening, right? So it wasn't like a conversation because, that was not a negotiable. But we just, it was rough because again, it was the first time in my life where I wasn't working multiple jobs. I started taking out loans because I needed to see my son. I needed to travel back and forth. And my I think $11,000 a month salary as a TA at the time wasn't going to cut it, right? So I amassed all these student loans, and for the travel, to keep that relationship, where we needed and wanted it to be. And I really thrived as a student at ASU. I encountered a couple of moments where one professor told me, "You came from a deficient program at a deficient university," and that kind of hurt my heart a little bit because, again, I love New Mexico. I love everything it offers, and so for a professor to just say like, "You arrived deficient,"
Yeah.
and I was like,
Wow.
"Yeah." And my mentor at the time, he told me, he's like, tú no sabes escribir en español. And I was like, well, the problem because I'm here to get a PhD in Spanish. And so I mean, the language hangups, like they're forever long, right? And
Yeah.
so I made it a point to prove that I was not deficient because of perceptions of me coming from a deficient place, and then out to prove that I could do this in Spanish. And I did. And by year three, my mentor was like, "Oh, you're doing so great," and da, 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 and all these things. And I'm like, so happy to have proved you wrong. Thank you. Um, but the supportive community I think was harder to find. And so in New Mexico, obviously I had my family, I had my friends, and call my dad and I would tell him, I'm sad, like I'm sad that life is what it is right now. And he's like, well, this is a choice you made. And I said, I get it, but can we still express empathy even though I made like these choices for myself?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I felt at the time that I made the choices for the right reasons, and of course, I think as like a young mom and being like a Chicana Latina young mom, there was a lot of perceptions of who I was as like, I can't tell you how many students, how many other people are just like, well, you just left your son. And I'm like, no, don't worry. I was like, "Listen, my dad was, like, not even at home half the time. He was out, like, working, and no one calls him a bad dad for doing this, but then, like, when women do it, it's like, you've
Yeah.
abandoned your children, you're a bad." And I'm like, so I got tired of that really quickly, and I'm like, "It's not your business. Don't worry about it,
Yeah.
and we've got it taken care of," And so, it was hard. It was really hard being away from home. It was hard trying to be the best PhD student I could be while also being a mom and really not wanting to be where I was. It took me a really long time to embrace Arizona. I didn't think it was a pretty place. I didn't think it was like, but I only picked ASU because it was 6.5 hours from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And again, I, for some reason, because I had gotten an undergrad in Spanish, tried to get something other than Spanish for my master's, but didn't. I thought I had to get all of my degrees in the same thing. So I
Mm.
did, right? And I didn't have an opportunity, or I didn't know that there was an opportunity to think about what other kind of pathways there are, right? Like we have people in Chicano literature who got like chemistry undergrads and now they're like Chicano literature, that's just to say like there's so many different pathways our students can choose and so many different ways where they can be successful. And most of us just don't know what the options are. And we don't know, like, again, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so
Yeah.
and we don't always know what our passions are, and we don't always know like if what we're doing is the thing that we should be doing, right? And so I think we should be free to just sort of explore those things. And I even going on the job market, I was like, Spanish departments, English departments, I guess, like I don't know. But I really did. I missed the community. It took me a long time in Arizona to form a community. My husband's from Mesa, Arizona, which is super helpful because he is like he super loves Arizona the way that I super love New Mexico, the way that I super love South Texas, in all their contradictions, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's it was really nice to when we started dating and I met his family and it just felt like my family, and I think
Yeah.
that really helped. We started dating about 2 years after I got here. And so yeah, it was good. It was good.
Vanessa, I'm gonna stop you there because when we scheduled it, I know there was you had some other things on your schedule. And I feel I feel like there's still some more there. I want to be mindful of our time, though we're about an hour in. And so what I wanted to ask you was, are you comfortable coming back for another, I don't know, 20-30 minute conversation? Because I don't want to keep you, I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Actually, I have my next thing is scheduled at 4, so I do have time.
okay.
If
Okay.
I'm happy to hang out
No,
if you want, or reschedule, whatever works.
no, 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 no. Then let's keep going. So you've walked us through the PhD. You talked about, right, how some of the challenges, and with your son and moving to a new place. Again, that theme of community, right, and finding that community and that support. But you mentioned something about the job market. So tell us about that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, for me, it was, I had colleagues who were applying to anywhere and everywhere, right? And I think when you're working with, depending on who your mentor is, they have thoughts about, where you should go and all of those good things. I think, again, at the time, I didn't know that
Yeah.
rankings for programs depend on where you place your graduate students and all of that stuff, right? So obviously, mentors are coming from a different perspective, right? They want you to take the best job wherever it is, and they want that for you, but they also want that for
For
their
them.
employers, right? And so I get that. But I had two kind of lines of thoughts for my mentors. One was a professor who said, I took a job in Corpus Christi because I had a family and I needed to support them, and I didn't have the luxury of, going anywhere on the job market. He said my family was very important to me, and I let that lead my way. And another professor who said, you go wherever you get a job offer and you apply everywhere and then you go there. And so, obviously, like, I like to get everybody's opinion on things. I like to get everybody's perspective, and then just kind of filter those through and see what makes the most sense for, my life and my situation and all of that good stuff. And so my main motivation for the job market was close proximity to my son. And so I had a whole
Okay.
spreadsheet where there was a column for distance to Albuquerque. How many hours would it take me to drive there? What's the cost of a flight there? All of those things. And I narrowed it down to probably, I think, 12 or 13 places, mostly in California, one in Oregon, Wyoming. I think the farthest east I went was Notre Dame because what Chicano Catholic doesn't want to go work at Notre Dame? And so, of course, I didn't get a call back for many of them, but I had 3 interviews, all very different places. I interviewed in Texas, in Oregon, and in Wyoming. And it was my Texas visit was very Texas. I was just telling someone this the other day. I got picked up in a big old truck by like a little white woman, and we went to my hotel, which happened to be off the highway across the road from a Whataburger. And then we went to dinner that night, and everybody was like in their jeans and cowboy boots, and it was like a checkered
Oh my
table.
gosh.
We had some fried okra and pickles, and I was like, this could not be more Texas of them to have. Right. I think after that one didn't go well, and I won't tell you where it was, but
How did
it's
you know I was going to ask?
I'll tell you after the recording's over.
Okay.
But, it didn't go well because I felt, I went in very, very confident, and I asked some hard questions, and I don't think people liked that very much. And, there may have been other factors, but, I think part of it was me wanting to ask hard questions, but then the other part was me trying to, be professional in the way that I thought I needed to be professional and say
Yeah.
the things that I thought I needed to say, right? Not ever having been, on a job interview before for that particular kind of role. And so I learned a lot. And my second one was in Oregon. Lovely place, small liberal arts college. I had a good experience there. People seem very supportive. And then in Wyoming. And Wyoming was interesting because I saw the job call and it said someone who does literature from point of contact to the present. And I said, I did that in my dissertation. I wrote from the 1500s to now. And at the time, of course, of writing my dissertation, it seemed dumb to cover such a wide range of. But, I went to Wyoming, and my dad was the one who told me, he was like, "That's your job." And he said, "That's where you're gonna go." And I kept that in the back of my head, and sure enough, I happened to be in Wyoming when I got the job offer from the place in Oregon, told the people in Wyoming, and they were just super supportive, and they were like, "This is when our candidates are leaving. We're gonna call you right when everybody leaves. Like, we're gonna have, we're gonna decide, and we're gonna let you know." And there was a lot of I was really impressed by the enthusiasm, and so I accepted the job in Wyoming, and it was an 8-hour drive to Albuquerque on a good day. And on the worst days, when there's traffic in Colorado Springs and Denver and it's snowing, it takes 11 plus hours. I learned that,
Oh, wow.
once I went there. So, um, the other place that I had really, that I still had an application out for was in New Mexico, and, at the time, that university had the only, Chicano studies department in the state of New Mexico, and, for us, but, I was really grateful that, he went with me. We weren't married at the time, and I said, "Hey, what do you think about going to Wyoming?" And I was taking him out of his home state for the first time. And he said, "I'm your biggest fan. I go where you go." And I thought that was, like, the nicest thing ever. And so we went to Wyoming together, and we loved it. We were there for 3 years, and, I told someone the other day it's a big fish in a small pond, but it's a great place to, I told you I was from Grants, New Mexico, like, much of the altitude, the, like, outdoorsy kind of thing is really replicated there, and had I not gone there, I would not have the research agenda that I have today. So I always tell people, I'm like, you never know when the job market's going to take you, but sometimes it takes you to really unexpected places. Never on any bingo card of my life would I have placed the state of Wyoming, right? But it turns out that there's a lot of Nuevo Mexicanos in Wyoming, and they went up to be sheep herders and railroad workers and sugar beet workers. And as I started to get to know that community more, that became my major research project, which is following the Manito Trail. So it looks at the migration
Wow.
patterns of Hispanic New Mexicans who migrated out of state to do all of these different things, who went to California to work in the shipyards, all of these things. So it became a major focus of the research that I do now. But I would not have done that had I not gone to Wyoming.
Wow. You said you were there in Wyoming for 3 years. And then what came next for you?
I, uh, really enjoyed being there. I think we
Hmm.
both knew that we weren't gonna be there for the long haul, but we were having fun, and it was a great time, and we had a lot of good friends and community and all of that stuff, and, there were a few jobs that came up in New Mexico and Arizona, and, my husband was like, "Let's go to Arizona," and I was like, "Let's go to New Mexico." And applied for the jobs, had some interviews, had some campus visits. This job here was
Hmm.
advertised as assistant professor of English, someone who could do Asian American, Indigenous, African American, Latino, or Chicano literature. And I was like, I can do 3 of those, and I'll do the other 2 if we need me to. But I remember I was in Wyoming. I got up at 5 in the morning for whatever reason, and I was looking through the Chronicle because every morning I was looking at jobs. Not because I
Yeah.
necessarily wanted to apply, but because I was interested in what was out there. and I saw this job, and I remember going to the kitchen, sitting in the chair in the kitchen and just like turning upside down with like glee, wanting to tell my husband at 5 a.m., but like he's not a morning person, so it wouldn't be nice. But I was so excited about it. And I just found the whole process to be super ethical, super fun. And now I'm here. And I've been here since 2016.
Oh, wow. So you get there and you're a professor,
Mhm.
right? Now, before we jumped on, or even when we jumped on, you talked about your role and then your new role. And so, you're at the university, and I think we can all agree, right? We're seeking tenure, right? And so we're trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do in order to secure tenure? Did you ever see yourself moving into an administrative position? And yeah.
Um, I don't know if it's the Leo in me that wants to like do these things, or the failed HR person in me. So, I did, there was a moment that really, so a couple things, I came to ASU, I wasn't a third year assistant professor. I started over again. I had a lot to do to get tenure, including writing my single authored book. And by the time I was year 9 of being an assistant professor, I was kind of over it. I'd been doing this for so long. Most people get tenure in their 6th year, but because I didn't bring years with me from Wyoming and instead I started over again, I was like, man, this is getting old already. Like I've been doing this for a long time. And most people would be halfway to full at that point, right? But I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so my former dean, Dwayne Rowan, again, shout out to him, he randomly emailed me one day and he said, "You would make an excellent leader one day. Like, let's chat." And I was like, "What is happening right now?" I was like, "Who talked to him? What is going on?" And it was always a point of mine as a junior faculty to make sure that like I was in the dean's like whatever his environment, right? If he was at an
Yeah.
event, I was going to the event to say, "Hello, Dean," I'm not, and this is something I had to learn, not something I knew, instinctively, but every time I got an award, every time something got published, I would email my faculty head and I would email my dean and I would say, "Hey, because there's no way that you know that I'm doing these things unless I tell you that I'm doing these things."
Yeah.
So, and I encourage people to say that too, if you want to be uplifted in some kind of way, let someone know, and other people are happy to do that for people, and other people want to do that for themselves, right? Whatever that looks like. No one knows what you're doing unless you say what you're doing. But, he sends me this email one day saying, "I think you'd be a great leader someday." And I called my faculty head and I was like, "Why is the dean sending me this message?" And he was like, I said, "Did you talk to him?" And he said, "No, I didn't say anything to him." He's like, "I agreed with him." He goes, "But I didn't talk to him." And so, I set up a meeting with the dean, and the dean said, "I mean that." He said, "I think you would be a really great leader." He goes, "I could see you being dean 10 years from now." And this is probably 5 years ago that he says this. So in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm like, all right, dean 10 years from now. And he said, you may want to serve on faculty senate, you may want to serve on personnel committee. He's like, think about what you can do post tenure to situate yourself for that. So in my mind, I thought, tenure, I get tenure, become an associate, do these things. Like I imagined a ladder of things, right? Or a pathway of things that I would need to do to be able to meet this end goal of being dean. And I think part of what I've learned in academia is that these opportunities come in different ways. And the I believe that part of the reason I'm in this role right now is one, because I find I think I'm a competent person first and foremost. And my students consistently say she's passionate and enthusiastic and knowledgeable. And I think that those are important things. Without fail, the students say this. And I like to be passionate about things. I have a lot of passion about things. And I was on the Faculty Women of Color Caucus as a campus rep for a number of years. And one year we didn't have a president, and the president approached me and said, "Would you be willing to serve as president next year?" And I said, "Sure." That sounds great. Because I also think that when you take from an organization for so long, like that reciprocal part of it is really important. Like I really feel like people need to be given back to things that they're taking from. And it's like
Absolutely.
that's just the way that I think about the world. So I know that if I'm in an organization for X number of years, I have to be willing to take on some roles sometimes because that's how these things work. Um, I think there are people that don't, and that's fine because they have their own reasons for it. But I just, my kid's 22 now. I don't have a reason. Like, what am I doing other than, going home and enjoying my life, which is a very fun thing also. But, so I agreed to serve as president. And one of my colleagues said, "Hey, Vanessa, like, I don't know, like, you're not tenured yet. And like, you don't know what's going to happen." And I was like, "It's fine. It's just a year." And that year happened to be 2020. So, uh, I must have agreed in fall of 2019 and then came into the role starting in fall of 2020, and it was a shit show. Everything was just nationally, it was hard. Obviously COVID was a thing, and I found it really difficult to navigate speaking for or with or in community with an entire group of women of color across the university at different ranks as an untenured Chicana professor. Um, I do think that we showed up a lot that year. I think that we did a lot of good work. And part of that role was intersecting with the vice provost, who I would have never intersected with otherwise, giving a presentation to the former provost, and being in rooms that I didn't think I was going to even be in for 10 years, according to my former dean, right? And so um I think that the way we showed up that year opened some doors. and
Wow.
and I thought and so I would say that before I became an associate professor, I was asked to be an assistant dean. And that to me was, again, disassociating because I was like, wait, I need to do this before I do this, before I do this. And I was able to demonstrate some capacities in another way that, allowed for an opportunity. And of course, folks were saying, well, why does she get to do it? She's like not even tenured yet. And she's, so, and I don't make the decisions, right? So I didn't say like, hey, have you thought about someone better than me? Like I would not say, why would you do that, right? Like, why
Yeah,
would you
yeah.
do these things? But I was grateful to have the opportunity, and part of that is doing a leadership assessment where, they send out a survey to all the folks you identify in a list, and they ask about your aptitude for leadership. And across the board, people said Vanessa is absolutely able to do this. She just doesn't have the experience yet. And they didn't say it as it was a negative thing because they said with experience, her capabilities will be so much better, right? And so
Yeah.
I sent it out, I think, to 53 people, and 50 people responded. So again, like the community, right? The community we're building where they're like, I do want to support Vanessa in this, and I do want to give feedback. And that feedback was really useful because it's one of those things where you do a self-assessment, then they do an assessment. It shows you how much your self-perception is matched against the way that other people see you. And you can do a lot of reflecting in that area. And
Mm.
um so it was good. And then so I did that for 4 years. This is my fourth year as an associate dean. Inclusion work is hard, man. Like it's a lot. And
Yeah, yeah, I imagine so. Yes.
yeah, and I think the hardest thing is being, the idea that you alone will carry. There's a perception, that like the associate dean will do this and this and this for us, but really, like it's everyone is doing such great things, right? And it's just how do we amplify all the great things that people are doing? How to create opportunities for people to do more? Um, how do we make sure that everybody knows about the great work that's happening, right? And then of course there are scenarios where we have to do some risk assessment and management and all of those good things, but I would say the vast majority of the job is really just like shouting out people who are doing awesome things.
Congratulations
Thank you.
on the work that you've done. And I think congratulations more so because clearly you were exhibiting, right, all of these qualities. You were putting in hard work, you were doing good things, and somebody took notice, right? And I think sometimes I think and I think every once in a while, in institutions, so all kinds of institutions, but absolutely at a university and in higher ed, it's possible to do good things and feel like nobody's ever paying attention to you. So congratulations to that. Congratulations on really, I think, making the most of that opportunity and doing the good work, continuing to do the good work. You just promoted, correct? Tell us about this new role.
Yeah. So, it was something that I'd heard about when I was on sabbatical. And I think we're always, I don't know how long one stays in a role before new roles come up, right? But I just want to do the most good wherever I'm at. And I recognize that sometimes we're in roles, whether that be a committee or, whatever, where we don't feel like we're doing our best work, right? I feel like I've been doing good work, and I feel like we as a community have been doing good work here on our campus. But this campus is great. It's such a small campus. We have about 6,500 students. It's on a former Air Force base, so it has a lot of that kind of military kind of history. And people have a lot of really great memories attached to the campus. A couple of colleagues of mine who started around the same time as I did were like, oh, we have all these like great ideas for this campus, and we want to do all this cool stuff, and people need to get on board because it's fun, and we're going places. And there's a lot of enthusiasm over like what the campus could be, right? It has a lot of potential for growth. Now an expectation of growth, which is a little bit different than just like good feelings and good vibes about it. But I remember, when I first got to campus, it was so small and it was so rural, and I loved it. I loved driving past all the agricultural fields, alfalfa fields, whatever they might be, and just like it was very peaceful to come out here. And of course, development is happening, and more folks are coming out to the East Valley, and now it's going to be like a major corridor for innovation and whatnot. And so the needs for the campus are different, So this position came up, and in October, November, and I didn't know. I didn't know if it was an opportunity for me. I didn't know if it was where I could do my best work. And moreover, and I think this is always a consideration, I wanted to make sure that my scholarly identity was protected. And so I remember having conversations early on and saying, whatever opportunities are available, I need to ensure that my scholarly identity is protected, and that there's going to be time to do research, because I got another level of professorhood to get to, right? I'm trying
Yeah.
to get to full, and there's just so many stats about not just women of color, but people of color in general who get stuck at the associate professor level, and that's not my intention. I don't desire to be one of those and to be like that. Um, but there are good reasons why people made those decisions, right? That's not the decision I'm making for myself, and I don't intend to get sidetracked from that goal, right? And so I wanted to make sure that that was something people would consider, and they did, and that was really good. And so I applied for it, and I interviewed, and again, these are, all these people who have been doing these jobs for a long time, and I'm sitting in there. And I think for the first time, I applied for a few jobs a couple years ago, and I really felt sort of out of my element because I was applying for these like VP roles, and I was like, shoot, like I'm just barely an associate dean. And but this time I said, I know this campus, I've been on this campus for 8 years. All I can do is go in and speak very honestly and transparently about what I see on this campus. And it was the least stressful interview I've ever done in my life. And I met with many people that day. And I
Wow.
left just thinking, I came to the table exactly as I am. Transparently, honestly, I wasn't sugarcoating. Of course, like I dressed the part the day, of course, because like we always got to do that. But, I felt really good about it. I felt really good about, the ideas that I had, the thoughts that I had, and obviously they thought that I had good ideas too, and so but I've been running around this campus for years being like, "Somebody should just put me in charge of this campus, like, I love it here, I wanna be here all the time, I wanna do all the good things," I'm really looking forward to it. I think, it's a little different because rather than advocating at a college level, I'm advocating on a campus level, and doing the things that I love to do, which is like connect people to resources. I joke and tell people my associate dean role is really like an operator. People are like, I need help with this. And I'm like, okay, I got you. And I'm like, I plug them in and they're just like, no, 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 wrong number. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Let me grab you a different number. And then eventually we're going to get them connected where they need to be connected, whatever it's for, right?
Yeah.
And so I enjoy that kind of role. So this is really more of like a connector person, a people person. And I just, I never imagined myself as that, right? But I do think it's a little HR-y, you know? I do think it is, because it is like listening to people's issues, helping them like problem solve, all of that good stuff. And so maybe at the heart of it, that was the desire, right? The desire to be connected to people, to know their stories, to know what they're going through, and to be a resource. And if that's not HR, like I don't know what is, but
It sounds like HR to me. And if I've learned anything from all of these conversations, it's fascinating how at one point, maybe early on, we see ourselves doing one thing or pursuing one thing, and then somehow we may not go down that road, we may not fully commit in that direction, but somehow that work finds its way to a lot of the work we do the rest of the way.
yeah.
And that's what it sounds like has happened here for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't have the title of HR manager, but come to me and I'll help you out. Like we'll figure it out. Yeah.
Before I let you go, two last questions. So do me a favor, describe this. So it's a standalone campus, standalone ASU campus. Tell me about the campus itself. What's different, what's unique about this campus?
Yeah, so ASU considers itself one university, many campuses. So it's different from like a UC model or different from a UT model where every campus has its own sort of like thing. So we're all connected to the same university, which is 190,000 students, the largest R1 institution in the US. We have half of that population is our ASU online population, and then the other half is our on-ground population. Of that on-ground population, you have students at various campuses. So the West Valley campus, which is on the far West Valley, then you have the downtown campus, Tempe, and then the Poly campus. Our campus is really focused on embracing kind of applied learning, hands-on learning approach. So it's, you're learning about it, but you're out there doing it and you're making connections to the world outside. You're not just sort of in the classroom learning about things, but you have an opportunity to go out and practice those things. We just started a Latinx oral history lab on campus, so we're really excited about getting out and hearing stories from the community, making that relatable to our students, seeing how students can utilize those stories for their own learning process. And that's just one of many examples. We have 6,500 students on campus. We are an official arboretum, so it's a very beautiful campus, lots of sort of native flora and fauna on the campus that people tend to enjoy. There's many different colleges located on the campus. The largest is the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering, and then the College of Integrative Sciences and Arts, where I'm at as a faculty member. We have nursing, we have WP Carey Business, we have Barrett, which is our honors college. We have College of Health Solutions, College of Global Futures. All of those have a presence on this campus. Sometimes programs are replicated across campuses. One of the kind of signature programs we have on this campus is Applied Biological Sciences, where you can get a degree in pre-vet and pre-dental. And then we also have a flight management program because we're right across the road from the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. And so there's a lot of
Oh, wow.
opportunities. And because we're a former Air Force base, it just like all of it just, there's a lot of opportunity. We have a flight simulator on campus. So a lot of really just trying to embrace that kind of polytechnic model, but making a space for sciences and arts within that. And thinking about how our different programs can kind of mesh together over time. We have an agribusiness program, we have indoor vertical farming, we have sustainable horticulture, all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that does sound like a really cool campus. It
it's
sounds
great.
like there's a lot going on there. Vanessa, as we transition out, um, I always ask my guests for final words of advice. So what last piece of advice would you like to leave for our listeners?
That's a big call.
It,
Yeah, so first I want to say thank you. This has been really lovely and definitely a departure from my normal daily activities. I appreciate it. And I just, I think for people, to sort of take away from this is that, you never know where life is going to take you, right? And I think to be open to the opportunities however they arise, and even if you find yourself in unexpected places, there's still so many beautiful things to learn from those places. And I think that if we kind of have an attitude of just embracing the places that we're at while we're at them, it can really take us far.
I love that. I love that. It's really well said. Thank you. Vanessa, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your story. I really enjoyed listening to it. Congratulations on the new role and on the work you're going to be doing, and I'm sure you're going to do a wonderful job. They're very lucky to have you. Um,
Yeah.
but this concludes another episode of the Way to College podcast. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to our listeners and viewers out there. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, follow, all of that good stuff. And don't forget to share the podcast with one other person. I'd appreciate it. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.